Jeff is going to be our moderator from Greentech Media. He is the senior editor with Greentech. If you guys have not checked out their service, you definitely should. They are the most articulate. I wasn't even paid to say this, but they are one of the most articulate groups that can educate folks on this topic. I was also told that there are no junior editors at Greentech Media. So anyway, get a few laughs. Thank you. Jeff, on your own.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks all for being here. I'm Jeff St. John, senior editor of Greentech Media. Push the top. Hi, everyone.
So when I talk, I push?
Yes. So, Jeff St. John, I'm a reporter at Greentech Media, a longtime newspaper reporter. Always wanted to be covering this stuff, and now for the last 6 years or so, I've been able to. And I am very pleased to have a esteemed panel of experts with us here today to talk about what the future holds for California's distributed energy infrastructure. The brief we've been given to discuss today is talk about current and planned technologies and services that will disrupt how energy, water, and gas are produced, transferred, and used in California and around the globe. This is obviously a pretty broad topic, but we've got three experts here. To my left is Scott McGaraghan.
Nope.
Nope.
No.
Sorry, guys.
Next left.
Yes, well, that makes sense. Peter Rive.
Rive, yeah.
Thank you very much. Co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Solar City. He probably needs no introduction, so hopefully you all are familiar with Solar City and the work they're doing, filling up neighborhoods with solar panels and some innovative work on energy storage on batteries linked with solar PV. To his left is Scott McGaraghan, Director of Business Development with Nestlabs, a maker of very sleek and intelligent smart thermostats. And to his left is Susan Kennedy, founder and CEO of Advanced Microgrid Solutions, and a deeply experienced individual in the California state energy and policy side of things. We at Greentech Media have coined this term grid edge to delineate a realm in which all these distributed and sometimes customer-owned energy assets are becoming a significant part of the broader energy mix. And it starts with rooftop PV and energy storage. It extends to intelligent energy management at the customer premise, Nestlabs, and in the longer run, combines into different aggregations of distributed energy resources. You can call these virtual power plants or, in some cases, microgrids. And so I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to talk a little bit about not only what your companies do, but how you define the grid that you're working with today in terms of where the grid ends and where the customer kind of takes over, as well as whether or not you think there are important ways that your company is working to change that definition. Peter, would you like to
Sure.
start?
So I think I'll first kind of trace through the evolution of solar and storage over the next 5 years. I think solar up until this point has been essentially a provider of energy, but has not been so great at providing any capacity value or reliability services. And over the next 5 years, that will change dramatically. And what we want to do is to extend these services to the distribution system operators who are in the best place to figure out exactly when they should be used and dispatched. So specifically, what Solar City is investing in, is first smart inverter control platforms. So this will give, and this is, and in kind of technology timeframes, these things seem kind of long, but all of this will happen within the next 5 years, and smart inverter control platforms and smart inverters in general will be available within the next year. And for those of you that are involved in this, it couldn't happen fast enough. There's no reason why these shouldn't be deployed right now. The faster we can get them out, the better. But this will essentially provide resiliency services like voltage control, frequency control, give us the ability to provide VARs. And so if you picture a future in which you have hundreds of thousands of smart inverters deployed throughout the distribution grid that can provide these reliability services, it's pretty exciting. Then the next is to embed storage by default with every single solar power system. And the short-term goal in terms of the quantity of storage that we aim to have with our solar power systems has the goal of effectively just shaving the peak. Meaning we want to be able to provide about an additional 2 to 3 hours of runtime on top of the solar power system, so that it can, in certain circumstances, extend all the way through to 9 and 10 o'clock at night. It's also important to know, and this is very important for me to convey, is that we are 100% confident that we can do this by the turn of the decade. And in terms of planning for distributed resources and solar specifically, know that the industry will be able to reduce our costs in such a way that unsubsidized solar plus storage is generally available by the turn of the decade. So that's our view. I will also say, and I just want to reinforce this again, that when we picture a battery being deployed with a solar power system, I think it would be a mistake to try to have some form of legislation or policy that will prevent the engineers from being able to arbitrarily dispatch and backfeed the battery system whenever they choose. So specifically what I mean is, in the current environment, if you deploy a battery system, you may not backfeed that battery system, okay? And that is a mistake from an engineering perspective, because the grid operators will want both the solar system and the battery system to be exported simultaneously in certain conditions. And we should try to, in my opinion anyways, having a strong engineering bias anyways. And I was amazed to see the amount of lawyers. How many engineers in the room? I'm curious, actually. Okay, good. So it looks like we have them covered. Like it's at least 1-to-1, right?
Maybe we should separate the room.
But anyway, so my strong engineering bias is if we can figure out the best way to kind of engineer the distribution system, and then figure out policy and legislation, that will be the best kind of multi-decade solution. So.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Sure.
Scott, would you like to talk about the customer premise?
Absolutely. So thanks for having me here today, and I should apologize to Jeff, since I promised to be here early enough to meet him before the panel and failed to do so. So confusing us is probably my fault.
No problem. Lot 10 was hard to find.
Lot 10 was hard to find. It was right next to Area 51, I think. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so Nestlabs, I'll also start with a little bit of a history. For those of you who heard of us first a few years ago, you might have heard of us as a smart thermostat company. And I think for our first couple of years, that's what most people thought of us as. However, if you've followed our trajectory over the last year and a half or so, we have evolved. We launched a second product, the Nest Protect, which is a smoke and CO detector. Not obviously related to energy, however, it does contain many of the same sensors that the thermostats do. So light, temperature, in addition, of course, to smoke and carbon monoxide, and occupancy. So this gives us, for homes who have multiple of our products, sort of a distributed set of information about what's going on in that house. And of course, we added DropCam to our portfolio of products earlier this year. And if you have seen any of our marketing or advertising recently, we have definitely shifted the focus to be about what we call the conscious home. So the home that anticipates what you are going to do or what you're going to need rather, and takes care of those needs in advance of your even really thinking about them. So we extended this a bit further even with our Works with Nest program that we announced this past summer, which is essentially a developer program with a set of APIs that allow for interactions between the Nest system and other products. Now, I think a lot of people, when they first heard about this, they assumed that meant we wanted Nest to be sort of the one ring that would rule them all, or the center of this little ecosystem. And actually, to the contrary, what we're looking for is a way to enable, again, those interactions between devices to do the things that you would expect them to do. Some of which don't have any energy impact. For example, the LifeX LED light bulbs, if you own one of those, and a Nest Protect smoke and CO detector. If we detect smoke, then we'll flash the LED red. So if you're hearing impaired, or if you want your neighbors to see it, it's sort of an additional alarm. Some of them do have energy impacts. So Whirlpool connected washers and dryers can leverage the fact that Nest is out setting up demand response programs to manage load with air conditioners, we can now, if you have a connected dryer, for example, we can pass that signal along through to the dryer and have that dryer also participate in the demand response event, curtail its consumption. So it's really trying to extend the sort of sphere of activity, but within the home. So to the question about where do we see our part of the grid or network or what have you, it is, I'm going to say, almost exclusively from the meter down through the rest of the devices in the customer's home. And I say almost exclusively because there's certainly some amount of feedback that we can provide back to grid operators that might have some interesting information that they can act upon for other grid management activities. And furthermore, if and when you install an Nest thermostat and we know where you are, we can, for example, map a bunch of different homes with Nest products together and manage across a microgrid or a series of homes that are connected to one another. So while we consider our forte to really be that interface between the customer and their conscious home, it does have some spillover effects into at least the small areas of the grid around those homes and perhaps the broader area as well. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll get into more questions in a bit.
Sounds good.
Jeff asked a question that I thought really tees this up well. He said, where does the grid end and the customer begin? I think what we're talking about today is the new frontier, and that is erasing the line between the customer side and the grid. Everything we're talking about today are challenges on how you utilize the immense power of the consumer side of the meter for grid support. And that is really where today's energy challenges really come home. 10 years ago, Carly Fiorina gave this great speech at the beginning of in the middle of the telecommunications revolution, where she talked about the technologies that were transforming the telecommunications industry from a physical and analog to digital, mobile, virtual, and personal. And over the last 10 years, you've seen this transformation happening not only in telecommunications industry, but in government. You've seen it in entertainment, and journalism, and healthcare, and education, and it's happening now in the energy industry in pretty much the same way. Disruptive technologies like the iPhone, the iPad, cloud computing have put information and control that used to be centralized, warehoused, controlled, and disseminated by big companies, big government, big data centers. Now it's literally into the hands of individual consumers. You've heard this before, but today's smartphone has more computing power than the Apollo spacecraft that landed on the moon. The decentralization of information and control through these enabling technologies, the internet, smart devices, cloud-based computing, has created its own economy, the Internet of Things, the sharing economy, the virtual workplace. What it's doing in the energy sector is just now beginning to hit home. These enabling devices we've been talking about, smart grids, smart meters, they're really tools. They're just tools. They're almost like the dumb pipes of the internet until the consumers actually use them. When the consumers are empowered and incentivized to use those tools, then they become transformative. There are three things that I think are disrupting the energy industry today. First is the reverse scalability. Everything that in energy used to be big, centralized and physical. Generation was operated and controlled at the central plant, and it was pushed out to the consumers. The consumer's relationship to energy was really an on-off switch. It was a thermostat that you had to physically go turn up or turn down. Today, generation is becoming smaller. It's becoming more affordable. It's becoming personalized, and like the PC of a few decades ago, it's being pushed to the edges of the network. So it's providing a level of control to the end user, whether it's roof-mounted solar or on-site generation, cogen or fuel cells for businesses. The second thing is the application economy. The same software and smart devices that turn the communications industry basically on its head, giving consumers control over the news they receive, the information they share, the products they consume. They give consumers choices about how much energy they use, what kind of energy they use, what they pay for it, what their carbon footprint is, and the two people I'm sharing this panel with are probably at the leading edge of exactly giving the consumers those kinds of controls over their energy footprint, if you will. The third thing that is changing everything is energy storage. Energy storage changes everything. The ability to store energy is a game changer that will enable the consumer choice, that will make the consumer side of the meter a grid resource. Or what Peter just said about rooftop solar. Solar is a time-sensitive resource. It generates when the sun is shining. It's costly and wasteful if it can't be consumed at the time it is generated. So when you add storage to a renewable generation, you exponentially increase the value of that renewable generation. Same is true with demand response. Right now, demand response is basically how uncomfortable can you make the consumer? Are they willing to turn up their air conditioning or turn down their lights or remember to program to turn things on and off? It's shallow and it's unreliable, so it's not really counted on as a grid resource. You add storage to that equation, that software, and you now have the intelligent building that can pre-programmed to respond to grid demands or market demands or consumer demands or price signals, whatever. But it exponentially increases the amount of demand response and the timing and control, and it leaves the consumer held harmless. It's a seamless transition. So now you have the consumer becoming part of the grid resource. It's also the mobility of being able to do this where you don't have to be home to handle the thermostat, but you can actually do it from your smartphone, from your mobile device, from your car or your office, or you can pre-program it. Again, enables consumers to participate. But I think the biggest challenges we face are twofold. One is consumers have to care. Consumers have to have a reason to get in to want to use these devices. The novelty of using a smart device to manage your home is gonna wear off unless you get some benefit from it. So the first and most important thing that we have to do in order to really unlock this resource is to create a rate design that pays for the infrastructure but incentivizes customers to invest in these technologies because it gives them something and they get value out of it. The second thing is the regulatory system, the procurement system, has to recognize these kind of customer side of the meter resources in order to be able to use them on the grid. You have procurements going on. You have a major procurement going on right now in Southern California. It's one of the largest procurements in history, $9 or $10 billion. They're procuring for the 2015 to 2021 time frame. And some of these technologies that could really unlock the consumer side of the equation as a grid resource, the regulations don't recognize them. So whether you have a requirement that it has to run for that a resource has to run for 4 hours when the grid could actually use 15-minute resources or an hour or 2-hour resources, you've just barred an entire class of customer side resource to be used as a grid used as for frequency regulation or for ramping or to deal with the duck curve. Some of the interconnection issues about when you charge these devices, and so by artificially constraining the utility's ability to fit these into their individual portfolios, in some areas they may want to be charging these during the middle of the day. Yet the way the rules are set up today, you may bar thousands of megawatts of resources from participating grid resources simply because they can't get through the labyrinth of the interconnection studies that are required in order to have them participate. Dual use, the fact that you have if you have our traditional procurement, which hundreds of millions of dollars being spent today by utilities, their traditional view of resources is that they have to have exclusive control over it. They don't even have the system set up to buy these kind of resources when it's shared with the customer. If you're going to unlock the customer side and truly make it a grid resource, you have to change their relationship and allow them to split the use of the resource so that the customer can use some, and you can aggregate what the customer's ability to provide a grid resource. That needs to be done today, because we are actually contributing to the problem by telling the utilities go out and procure enough resources to handle the consumption of everyone in their service territory, which is what they're procuring right now, And then at the same time period, we're gonna go try and sell consumers the ability to handle the same consumption. Whether it's we're selling them a rooftop solar or we're selling them on demand response, you're basically, you've told the utility to go out and buy all the resources they need to cover those folks during the, and then you're gonna go try to sell consumers on to handle the same grid. I mean, the same consumption. So we have to, the regulations have to get in front of the procurement and include and be designed around the customer side of the meter to allow them to participate as a grid resource. You will then unlock massive investment and massive grid resource, and you won't have to build another peaker plant ever.
Wow. Well, thank you, Susan. I really appreciate it. You know, maybe this is a question that I could open to any of you who want to respond. How do you do all those things you just described? Or let's just take one of them. Can you all talk about California's kind of regulatory framework and the changes that are underway in California's regulatory framework in terms of any of those that you think are either potentially effective ways to change the regulations to allow the things you just described, or any particular kind of regulatory roadblocks that are in the way of getting to that state that you described? If any of you all want to pick your favorite, I'd be happy to.
I just the first one that jumps out at me is the definition of resource adequacy in California. It is right now the utilities are told to go procure resource adequacy, which is their roadmap for what they have to buy. It's a strict definition that deals with the peak time of the day, right, during the belly of the duck. Mm-hmm. What they need is flexible resource adequacy, flexible RA resources that can deal with the shoulder months and the shoulder times of the day. We're telling them to procure one thing without giving them the flexibility of being able to use resources like what we're putting behind the meter to be able to handle the duck curve, right? To be able to handle the load shape today. So it's as simple as something as the definition of resource adequacy that we're telling them to go out and procure.
Okay, and maybe you two guys could discuss this because that stuff is not owned by the utility. It is owned by the customer. It is managed perhaps by your companies. Mm-hmm. How would you describe how you guys are working with utilities and regulators, or discussing with utilities and regulators ways in which a non-utility owned resource can be considered a resource in the RA proceeding?
So it relates to a particular part of these proceedings that I take issue with at times, and that is the notion that price things correctly and everything will fall into place right away. And I know that I don't think anybody, when you really engage with them on this, actually really thinks that that's how it happens and recognizes there's a transition. But I think it's worth talking through what the transition might entail. So, for example, if we have dynamically variable prices both over time and by geography to reflect constraints that are moving around on the grid, I think we will hit a day where we have consumers who buy equipment and devices and things like that for the purposes of dealing with that. But I think we're a ways off from that. And in the meantime, those signals are likely to be lost on customers, and you'll end up with customers paying more, perhaps, and maybe not, maybe taking some actions accidentally, maybe not. But that those signals, I think, for the near term as a transition step, are best passed through the people who actually have these perhaps more sophisticated and more bigger footprints than an individual home, who can actually manage across a number of homes, who can actually provide a service to the customers without them even necessarily knowing that there's some complexity behind it.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that's actually a very, very good point. As we think about like this evolution, like there are just maybe a couple of dozen of third parties that are really kind of causing this change. And from the customer's perspective, they kind of want something fairly simple. The reason why customers go solar is they want cleaner, cheaper energy. That's it. It's that simple, and it's very straightforward in order to be able to explain those benefits to them. But then the benefits that we can provide the grid operators, okay, are going to be essentially complicated for any given consumer to understand, but are going to be something that these intermediaries like Solar City are going to be able to provide to the utilities. So the point is just that I think you need to try to create two interfaces. One that is simple to the customer, and then one that is more complicated and meets these kind of high-level objectives between technology-oriented and kind of these third-party companies and the utility.
Let's see, I did want to open up the panel to audience Q&A as early as possible. And so let's do that. I don't know if anyone in the audience has any questions for any of our panelists or general questions on the topics we've been covering so far.
Hi, I'm Judith Schwartz from 2 Point.
Judith, I think this is all. We're going to try and get these. I think Genesis and some others will be helping us here. I think we have more than one question.
Hi, Judith Schwartz from 2 Point. What strikes me as you're talking, and I'm going to include the video that was at the beginning, is that my work is in customer engagement. And so I've looked a lot at what are the different segments of consumers, and it's pretty consistent in terms of that there are these different sort of energy worldviews of how people approach it. And one of the things that happens with energy worldviews is that people tend to project their energy worldview onto everyone else. And so in the excitement for the technology that I'm hearing from all of you, I'm seeing, there's a group right now that are the people who are very concerned about privacy. And right now with the wall stopping at the household with the meter, you can make the argument to the people who are concerned about privacy that no one can see inside your house, and that's yours. What I see and what you're all talking about in that screen where the EVs were on the utilities, they know where the EV is and where it's charging, I could see the group of people who are going to care about privacy just expanding exponentially to people who normally weren't concerned about it at all of a sudden. And so what's your sense of how do you balance for the people who don't care about, who don't see it as an intrusion issue, it's not going to be a problem. But I think you really have a risk of expanding it. So what's the lockbox or the information lockbox for the people who don't want to be tracked so heavily that they're supported in this? Because I think they're going to get very vocal, and we're going to lose the ability to argue to say, hey, the visibility stops there.
So I had the same reaction to you to the video, actually, and I am absolutely not arguing for expanding the sort of the reach into the home for the utility. I think we're on pretty shaky policy grounds to essentially say to a customer, right, we're going to take your money when you pay your bill, we're going to hold some of that ransom unless and until you put some equipment into your home that allows us to gather some of that private, personal information, the private information. I think it is a very different proposition to tell that customer, you have a choice to work with a third party who may well collect some of that information and anonymize it and aggregate it to make it valuable to the utility, but you don't have to. And if you want to choose one over another, you can choose one over another. But to say that you have to go to the, you have to provide that information to the monopoly provider that you don't have any choice over, I think you will get on very shaky policy grounds very quickly.
I'd say that you've got to be completely open and transparent. If ever a customer wants to kind of adopt any of these technologies, you have to make it very clear to them exactly what data you're going to be collecting and what you're going to be doing with it. But I also think a lot of these problems can be solved kind of automatically without necessarily having far-reaching kind of influence or control over everything in the home. I mean, if you think about like a battery control system, it primarily needs to be coordinated with the distribution system at large and the solar power system. It doesn't necessarily have to be able to be sharing data. Like if you want to have the battery system be integrated with the thermostat, like there aren't too many privacy concerns there. If a customer necessarily says, okay, I'm comfortable with you kind of pre-cooling my home. Right? They say just generally, I'm cool with that. You're going to save me money. I'm on a TOU rate. It's cool for you to pre-cool my home, right? Then like it's kind of like a local control system.
It's a subtle distinction.
Well, I think that like the type of thing that will really freak people out is if they thought, okay, like you're going to send everybody my thermostat settings all the time. okay? Or you're going to tell somebody's always going to know exactly how much energy I'm producing in any given second, right? I think that stuff is going to freak people out. But I think that what we've got to be able to do is to try to get people to be somewhat comfortable having their kind of information aggregated in some way without specific identification, right? I think that that'll be does that make sense? It's like you want to be able to.
It makes sense, but I think that it's the perceptual issue. So when you paint this picture of these things all connected, I think it's a subtle
Judy, we got to try and get you on a microphone if we could. Have a response.
I was just saying, I think it's a subtle distinction. So
Yeah.
I understand the intent and the whole idea that it's aggregated and anonymized makes sense, but as the picture that you're painting,
Yeah.
okay, as people who are excited about the technology, I think the way it may get perceived by some other groups who are not motivated from the place of being excited about the technology, it may be a bit subtle. So that's all I'm saying is how to do it.
We have a question in the back as well from Janice. Sorry, you're next, but I'll take some other questions here. Price is right.
Thank you. Janice Lynn from the California Energy Storage Alliance. Really appreciating this panel from the back of the room, and I was wondering if you could all comment on the other barriers. I think it was Susan who mentioned that regulations need to get in front of procurement to unlock these massive distributed behind-the-meter resources. Yet, in our experience, regulations are certainly important, but there's other barriers too. And when we think about using distributed behind-the-meter resources, especially for avoiding new peakers, maybe optimizing the distribution system itself, it can challenge the traditional model of utility, how utilities make money. And in our experience, progress is usually fastest when we can all get on the same side of the table. So I'm wondering if you could comment on how this revolution and how we can work with utilities, and it's not just the utility business model, but also the many folks who are working inside the utility and need to make sure the lights stay on and have concerns about reliability, and how do we all get on the same page?
I'll take a start at that. I don't think you can separate the regulations from the utility procurement. They are dictating exactly what the utility is doing. And I'll give you two examples. There's, again, going to procurements that are happening right now as we speak. They are struggling with being told by the regulators that they can only procure preferred resources that are incremental to what they will normally be getting in through the utility-based programs that have been in place for years. There's no easy way to decide what incremental is. And I believe I'm right from my conversations, that they would probably buy twice as many of the preferred resources that we all would like to see them buy if that was clear, or if they had the flexibility to procure them. But for that one regulatory barrier of the definition of what is incremental and what is not. That's number one. In the roadmap that the regulators have given to the utilities in terms of storage, for example, a great roadmap. They have put lines around what is in the customer bucket, what is in the distribution level bucket, what is in the transmission level bucket, and if they inadvertently they've put a cap on the customer side of the meter by the buckets that they have determined, thinking they were protecting the customer side of the meter. If the utilities are able to utilize aggregated resources like some of the ones we're talking about up here, that can count towards the distribution side of their procurement. And they would be buying a lot more. The market would be opening up exponentially if the utilities were given the flexibility to buy more of the kind of resources, but for the fact that the regulations are somewhat behind the procurement, and so there is no clear path for distributed resources to fit into the grid procurement that they're already mandated to participate in using yesterday's definitions.
I think something else that'll be kind of useful is for utilities to be able to rate-based services rather than equipment, to allow third parties to kind of invest in something that provides the kind of equivalent value of, say, reconductoring or something like that. And anything, in any way that you can say provide for, say as an example, some sort of a capacity or payment or some sort of a service payment that the utility can rate base in lieu of actually making traditional infrastructure investments, I think would be an interesting tool for them.
Interesting. I don't know if you guys have a sense of whether the distributed resource planning renovations going under AB 327 today are addressing any of those possibilities right now. Or do you have any thoughts about other California proceedings that may be helping?
They're all addressing it, but resource adequacy has been a proceeding that's been open for how many years? Interconnection, 6 years, something? So it's a very complex labyrinth to try and sort out. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent by the utilities procuring resources based upon the stuff that hasn't been sorted out yet.
Right.
So you have to look at the tools you have today. First of all, there has to be a conversation that starts with a cross-pollination between the regulatory. This is not about the PUC. The PUC is one entity, a very, very important entity, but it's the CAISO's definition of resource adequacy and what is necessary and what is allowed to be sold into the wholesale market, for example. It is, I mean, there has to be the kind of leadership between the agencies to talk about what are the barriers to distributed resources and what is in our power to fix them today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how can we avoid letting, making perfect the enemy of good enough?
Exactly.
If we're going to have 6 more years of these proceedings that are opening now are taking 6 years, that's 6 years lost where we could have gotten, I'm guessing, the vast majority of the value by doing something that's available to us today instead of waiting.
And if the utility, let's say Southern California finishes their procurement for the next through 2021, then there's your market forecast should focus on the customer you might get in 2022.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, we have to inject those changes today into the procurement and not wait for the proceedings to make the perfect the enemy.
You know what confuses me about that though? It seems to me that all the stuff that's happening like on the rooftop and in the garage or basement with the battery or with the thermostat, that stuff is part of the plan today, but that's the stuff that goes into what they believe the curve is going to be, that they got to procure stuff to deal with, right? Is that sort of how it works?
Yes and no. I mean,
Okay.
the procurement they have right now is the local capacity requirement, Southern California, ground zero for everything we're talking about.
Yep.
And the definition of resource adequacy, which is what they are directed to procure, is for the peak between the hours of 12 and 6 or 2 and 6.
Mhm.
They need flexible resources for
Right.
which storage and the customer side of the meter resources can provide these massive benefits. And that's not what they are required to procure under this resource.
Right.
So they need flexibility
Right.
in the current resource.
And also, because they are not allowed to presume that, for example, Solar City is going to be able to make, I think you said energy storage, kind of a integral part of every solar system. I mean, theoretically, if you had a battery with every solar, rooftop, the duck curve would go on a diet, right? It would be a much less fat belly. And then I guess the ramp would be less extreme and therefore problem solved. So it's kind of like you solve it in the curve part or you solve it in the reacting to the curve part. And I get very confused by that. I don't know if you guys have any insight on.
Well, I mean, I kind of see it as we basically need to build a suspension system, right?
Yeah.
For net load, right? And so it's like what we have right now is like no suspension system. So it goes like, so you just kind of need to go no. You need it to be like relatively flat. It's gonna. Hopefully, we continue to deploy solar, right? I mean, we have to for the sake of humanity, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So there will inevitably be more energy in the middle of the day, which is actually a really good thing, I think. Like you can desalinate water, you can do a lot of stuff, okay, if you have an abundance of clean energy in the middle of the day. So I think inevitably, hopefully, over a period of decades, there will be an abundance of clean energy in the middle of the day. But then you've got to make sure that at night, more and more of that energy is being provided, and that there just isn't as much spikiness coming out of essentially net load. So you just need this kind of suspension system.
I think we have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. So I'm going to be the James Brown of the conference I'm seeing. So sorry if we don't pick you, but just raise your hands and they'll come to the microphones. I'm just going to pick geographically of maybe where we haven't yet. There and then here. And then Mona. So Cameron? And please announce yourself as well when you do your call.
I'm Cameron Brooks. I come to your firm, Tolerable Panel. I was curious, for each of the three of you, I would assume that each of your solutions has a very different value based on where it is physically on the network and what feeder circuit, what that system profile looks like. Again, I have to presume is very different in the middle of the Central Valley as opposed to up in the foothills as opposed to suburban development. Maybe going back to Judith's question a little bit, there's a lot of concern about privacy. There's a corollary to that, which is that we really don't know much about the system right now. And I'm wondering how important you see that to the success of your business going forward to be able to target your deployment. And I know that's a topic that's under consideration in this proceeding. Is that something that you see as vital to your strategy going forward? Is how you get better system information?
Well, from my perspective, it's a vital piece of information, but it's not that I need to have it in order to know how to offer my product. What we do is aggregate distributed energy resources designed for grid support. So it's not that hard for us to go into a utility area and identify where their needs are in terms of what their transmission line, what substations, where they're loaded, not loaded. What I need to understand is where they can handle charging batteries during the day, or where that is going to be an issue, or where the load pockets are in relationship to the specific substations that are in very congested areas. So it's, to me, the information that I need is there, and the information is there amongst most of the utilities for their planning purposes. So I don't see that as a barrier.
From Nest's perspective, I think we have a pretty good sense of the value we can provide to the grid in terms of economic demand response and efficiency. We've got a pretty good sense of what we can provide in terms of more capacity-based demand response at sort of transmission level, grid level. But I hear wildly varying estimates of the value of localized load management, distribution level load management. And some people tell me, oh, it's going to triple the value of the grid services over what the first two things that I mentioned that you already know about. The distribution level value is going to triple that. Sometimes I do my own back of the envelope and think, well, maybe it's another 20%, but it's going to be highly variable and not just over location, but over time as well. So for me, I think what I don't have right now is I don't need to know, I don't need a price signal at each feeder to say exactly what the value is at that point in time at that location. I need to know how variable is it going to be and what's the rough order of magnitude as in terms of the high and the low. And then that can help me decide, all right, is it even worth trying to build that next set of grid services to provide distribution level load management?
I look at it in terms of, again, three different features of a distributed resource. Energy, capacity, reliability services. Energy should be provided in such a way that it encourages the customer to self-generate, and consume less. Capacity, and reliability services are those things that are very location specific, and a market needs to be developed to award those services being provided to the distribution system or to the transmission system. So, but again, I think that the distinction between those three is fundamentally important in that question.
Okay, here, and then we will, I think Mona was next, and we'll go from there. So if you could just be brief and then also announce who you are. And
Ed Castle, I work with storage and something called transactive energy. Susan, I thought, started out in the right direction by saying, first we got to get the tariffs. And then as the conversation went on, said, well, you can't have any dynamic pricing in there because it's too complicated for customers. So then we go into much more of a command and control point of view, which is to say, we engineers, we engineers have to think about how do we manage the customer's home in their interest, rather than letting that be an autonomous decision by the Nest thermostat in the home, or the control system in the home, or the solar system, responding to the pricing signals that come out of the tariff. Now, that tariff doesn't just have to be a dynamic real-time tariff. It's a long-term component where people can buy power, and a short-term component. And so, do you think something like that could work?
Describe it again, a long-term and short-term component of?
The tariff. In other words, the customer can subscribe for a given amount of power that's shaped to fit their needs at a fixed monthly price. And if you use more than that, you pays a spot price. Spot price can be computed by various means, private and wholesale market department. If he uses less, he gets paid the spot price. All the right signals for managing storage, timing when you do your price responses, and stable revenues to the utility, stable costs to the customer.
I don't think so. I mean,
You don't think so?
no way. I mean, like, you know, so we speak to about 100,000 customers per month, and so we speak to them about their energy usage, and like it's very cause and effect for them. When I turn on my light, it costs me this much. Like it's just I don't think that anything other than like basically just dollars per kilowatt hour is something that customers should be thinking about. You know, like the quantity of kilowatt hours that I'm using and the cost of those kilowatt hours.
And I'll say, first, to be clear, I think only in terms really of residential customers. So I might have a different thought on commercial and industrial customers, but let me sort of paint two pictures of two demand response programs that we operate. One is a peak time rebate. Your incentive as a customer is you get $1.25 a kilowatt hour. Another is you get paid an upfront incentive for your first 2 years of participation. That first program, your expected value is probably something like $60 per year. The second one, it's $85 for your first 2 years, so it's a lower expected value. Enrollment is probably 3 times in the second program what it was in the first. The load reduction is essentially the same. So which to me speaks to the complexity. You were talking earlier about making this a very straightforward proposition to somebody. Here's $85 versus you can probably get 60. Even that level of complexity made for.
So with your Nest thermostat and the intelligence built into that, it knows the price in its current 15-minute interval, 15 minutes from now through the rest of the day. Can't you figure out how to pre-cool and optimize for that customer, minimizes costs and maximizes comfort, whatever you want? So you can do that.
We can and do that. We can
You
and
already
do that. However, that's exactly what I'm talking about in these two programs. You do pre-cooling.
So isn't that simple for the customer?
The proposition to the customer, I don't think, and can be any time in the near future, spend $249 on this thermostat, and you might get $60 a year back.
Doesn't that depend on the volatility of the prices?
We have a 4-question limit today, just so you know.
Well,
So,
can I take a crack at this?
Good.
Yeah,
go ahead.
the
and then we're
issue
going
is
to move to Mona next.
you're-
This is great.
I'm happy to take this at another time.
the simplicity in terms of what the customer understands is you're not going to sell a customer based upon some complicated scheme, or you're not going to, and you can't sell a customer to put in a $250 thermostat by saying, don't worry your pretty little head about it, we'll figure it out, we think we can save you money. For the industrial customer, that you may be able to do something that complicated, and I think it's actually pretty simple for an industrial customer, not for the residential side. It's got to be as straightforward, as simple as I use this much electricity, I pay this much, and
We are going to have so much time for coffee and everything else, so this is great.
remind me not to hire you for the marketing for that.
Mona, who's right in the middle in pink right there. Next. Well, Aram, and then I will turn it back to our moderator here. We may have time for one more.
Thank you. Mona Attorney Lloyd with Betternach. Very interesting discussion by the panel. I want to go back. Well, first of all, say I agree with all the barriers that you identified, Susan, earlier. But I want to go back to one of the first things that you said, which is customers have to care. And, there's a fairly high percentage of adopters of technology in this room, but we're in the energy industry. We may not be representative of the general public at large. And with the greenhouse gas emissions goals, we're going to need larger adoption. So how do we get customers in here?
You save them money. No, so again, I speak to 100,000. I was really disappointed when we first structured solar pricing. I was like, well, if you price it at the same price as the grid, they'll buy it, right? And like, no way. It was unbelievable. So you just got to save them money. It's not more complicated than that.
I would add, if what you're trying to do is to get them to achieve those goals, if you're trying to get them to care about it, there is an alternative route, which is to do it without them having to care about it and get them to buy products for other reasons. But that's not doing what you're saying. That's achieving the same end result, but it's not getting them to care about it.
And I think you have to break this up. They're talking about very large numbers of individual energy users, and that's a different equation than some of the very large customers that I think you can get volume out. So, for example, one of the groups that we're working with is a major building owner in a targeted area. Got 25 buildings, and within 25 of their buildings, they have. I'm talking big commercial buildings. They have two megawatts of load that they have qualified and certified to be bid into the capacity bidding program by the utility. 2 megawatts of load. They make about $20,000 a year on that. I would say that's couch change, but I guarantee you their couches cost more than that. They're only doing it to be good corporate citizens. If you can't make the incentives for a big commercial property owners to participate in demand shedding, from an economic perspective, they have no reason to do it. And so from both the individual, the homeowner, the residential customer, and the large industrial commercial customer, the rate schedule, the tariff schedule has to be, and I don't, it's not, I agree with what you're saying. It's not as simple as price signals will get people motivated, but the rationale of the way we set our tariffs has to be designed towards involving them as part of the solution and giving them the tools to make these decisions where they can save money by investing in energy efficiency or in solar or in on-site generation. And today it's not. We still have, the first step is to get over the mindset that if customers have to be charged any differently or any more than they are today, we're hurting them. That's bullshit. I mean, we're stuck in this place where we're afraid of dealing with the rate structure for consumers, and we can unleash the potential if we just do it the right way.
I think we have just about 5 minutes left. I wanted to give all our panelists one final crack at maybe if you had one recommendation, one key change that you would make to the way all of this stuff works, what would it be?
I guess I would just say, listen to the engineers.
Wait, what are they saying though?
There's, so they're saying things like, allow a customer-sided storage system to be connected behind the meter, in front of the meter, and allow both of them to go at the same time. Right? Like, I mean, there's lots of different things that they're saying, but I think that the conversation just seems to be kind of dominated by lawyers and economists. And engineers will make it cheaper, man. They will. Like, okay.
So I'm glad you said that. Actually, now I think mine will be listen to the engineers and then listen to the customer, because you'll have a great engineered solution, and I think there's a pretty good chance that the best engineered solution won't be consistent with customer experience, because the best engineered solution is probably actually to just shut them off whenever you feel like it. However, I know it's not what you're proposing, but I think take that engineered solution, then balance it against what you think you can really get customers to embrace and buy into, and not actually have to think about very much, and make that a back and forth between the engineering and the customer's perspective on it. But I think it is an interplay between the two, and I agree, probably to the exclusion of perhaps the sort of economist perspective or a more sort of pure policy perspective.
One thing I would have to say, do an emergency operation on the definition of resource adequacy, so that what the utilities are procuring today has the flexibility to be able to use the kind of customer side of the resources, customer side of the fence resources that I think are out there with storage. That's the single most important thing that's guiding the utilities, is that definition.
And I guess one final question: do you guys have a sense of if anyone out there has been able to figure out just how much we are holding ourselves back in terms of enabling all this technology to get out there and to make money for both the consumers and the utilities and serve the needs of the utility in terms of reliability. Has anyone got a sense of how much our current regulatory structure is holding back what could be out there?
I don't think it's holding it back that badly, to be honest. I mean, I think it'll be nice because like, there's so much stuff that has to happen with these things, okay, that'll take about 5 years. You know, like battery systems and solar power systems just need time and technology investment to become cheaper. And so I think it's just important to kind of move them along in parallel, but to use the success as an assumption. Does that make sense? But I actually, I mean, I don't know, I can't think of anything. I wouldn't say that, like, generally there is something that is totally preventing us from moving forward right now.
I'd agree.
I think I'm not sure I 100% agree, only because I think the utilities are in the process, in California, all 3 utilities are in the process of either purchasing or putting on the street RFOs to purchase tens of billions of dollars of resources. And if they procure resources under the current rules without doing some triage on some of them, the market for the technologies we're talking about is going to be taken up. They're going to be buying gas resources because that's what their current procurement calls for, because the rest of it's not ready. So I think there's billions of dollars in opportunity if we do emergency triage on some of these definitions while these procurements are going on.
Is there such a process going on? I don't know if the living pilot proposal in SoCal.
Screw pilots. I mean,
okay.
whenever we don't know what to do with something, we start a pilot. You know how many pilots we've had? I mean, it's like we've learned a lot about pilots. And what we need, the utilities are buying resources right now. And we have, the people sitting at this table actually have resources that we know can fit into can actually solve some of their problems with the distribution grid and with their capacity in some of these areas where they need flexible resources. They need resources that don't require new distribution lines, new distribution upgrades, or where the customer is actually participating and paying for the resource. We have those. They're buying them right now. So, you know, we don't need a pilot. We need some conversation and leadership about the rules.
Great. Well, on that note of urgency, I'd like to conclude this panel. Thank our panelists again.
Thank you.
And thank you all for participating.